Tara Bell and Madison Cole weren't killers in the eyes of their neighbors. They were just two ordinary women, living quiet lives in a quiet town. But behind closed doors, they were plotting something horrifying. Driven by obsession and a thirst for control, they lured Elise Monroe into a carefully constructed death trap and filmed every moment of her final days. Monroe had always been considered the kind of person who brought calm into chaos. At 25, she was already carving a promising path as a nursing student at Cedar Ridge Medical College. Her dedication to her studies and her patients made her well-respected among classmates and hospital staff. She lived alone in a cozy one-bedroom apartment on Pineview Lane, a quiet street in a sleepy suburban town where neighbors exchanged pleasantries and nothing truly sinister ever happened. At least that's what people believed, until Elise vanished. It began on a Thursday morning in early April. Elise was scheduled for a 7 a.m. shift at the hospital. She never showed up. At first, her co-workers assumed she had overslept or was running late. But hours passed and she didn't answer her phone. Multiple calls went to voicemail. A close friend and fellow nursing student decided to visit her apartment, hoping to find some explanation. The door was locked. Lights were off. Everything was still. By late afternoon, the concern had turned into panic. Elise's parents were contacted. They hadn't heard from her either, which was unusual. Elise called her mother every evening. That night, the police were officially notified, and a missing persons report was filed. Officers were dispatched to her apartment. There were no signs of forced entry. Her phone was charging on the kitchen counter. Her keys were on the table. Her purse was missing, but her car sat untouched in the driveway. Nothing looked out of place. There were no broken windows, no evidence of a struggle. A full cup of tea sat cold on the nightstand, as if she had left in the middle of a routine. Evening. Investigators canvassed the neighborhood, asking residents if they had seen or heard anything strange the night before. Most said no, but one neighbor recalled seeing Elise around 8:30 p.m., walking down the street in casual clothes. Home security footage from a house a few doors down confirmed this. In the video, Elise could be seen walking calmly down the sidewalk. She paused near the curb where a black SUV had pulled up. The angle and lighting made it difficult to identify the vehicle clearly, but Elise appeared to speak with someone inside. After a moment, she stepped off the curb and got in. The SUV drove away. That was the last confirmed sighting of her. This detail changed everything. Police shifted the investigation from a possible voluntary disappearance to a suspected abduction. The black SUV became the focus. Bulletins were issued to nearby towns asking for help identifying the vehicle. Surveillance footage from local businesses and traffic cams was reviewed, but the SUV seemed to vanish after turning out of the neighborhood. Leads were scarce, and speculation grew quickly. Some wondered if Elise had left willingly, possibly, to meet someone she trusted. Others feared something darker. Within days, social media lit up with theories. Posters with Elise's face appeared all over Cedar Ridge. Candlelight vigils were held. But as the days turned into weeks with no sign of her, the hope of finding her safe began to dim. What no one realized was that the answer had already been captured on tape, and it was far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. The memory card changed everything. It was discovered by accident, taped beneath a dusty shelf in a storage unit that hadn't been rented in over a year. The man cleaning it out assumed it had been forgotten by the previous occupant. He nearly threw it away, but something made him curious. When he loaded the footage onto his laptop, he immediately called the police. The contents of the card were both disturbing and surreal. The grainy video showed a dimly lit room, likely a basement with unfinished walls and a single hanging light bulb. At the center of the frame was Elise Monroe. She was tied to a wooden chair, her hands bound behind her back. She appeared disoriented, possibly drugged, with bruises visible on her arms and a tear-streaked face. Off camera, two female voices could be heard, laughing and talking as if filming a documentary. Their tone was casual, almost cheerful, describing what they were doing. As the final phase of the experiment, police analysts enhanced the audio and isolated the voices. A voice match confirmed the speakers as Tara Bell and Madison Cole, two women who at first glance had no reason to be involved in something so horrific. They weren't fugitives or known criminals. They had no known ties to Elise in adulthood, but a closer look into their past revealed otherwise. Tara and Madison had both attended Cedar Ridge High School with Elise. They had been acquaintances more than friends, never close, never confrontational, or so it seemed. Elise's old yearbooks and social media posts hinted at some tension. A few classmates recalled that Tara and Madison had bullied certain students during school, often in ways that went unnoticed by adults. Elise, they remembered, once stood up to them after witnessing them tormenting a shy classmate. It had led to a brief suspension for the girls, and while the incident was long forgotten by most, it clearly wasn't forgotten by them. Social media. Records showed that Madison and Tara had reconnected in late 2020. Madison had moved back to Cedar Ridge after living in the city. Tara was still in town, working sporadic jobs. They began spending time together again, sharing cryptic videos and photos online. Madison, in particular, had a strange online presence. She ran a now-deleted YouTube channel under a pseudonym, where she posted social experiments and videos designed to provoke reactions. Most of them were staged, but some hinted at darker intentions, clips featuring bound mannequins, unsettling, voiceovers about control, and references to pushing people beyond the edge. Investigators discovered that Tara and Madison had been planning something for months. Text messages, emails, and notes recovered from their devices revealed a disturbing plot. They wanted to abduct someone, hold them captive, and document the psychological breakdown that followed. They referred to it as the control test. It was never meant to be a prank or performance. It was a twisted obsession. Elise had been chosen carefully. She wasn't picked at random. They saw her as perfect, someone they had history with, someone who symbolized everything they had failed to become. She was successful, admired, and strong-willed, and in their minds, breaking her down would be the ultimate proof of their control. The video on the memory card was only a glimpse. The rest of their plan, what they did, how far it went, remained hidden. But it was enough to issue arrest warrants and spark a hunt for the two women who had turned a schoolyard grudge into a chilling, calculated nightmare. As police dug deeper into the lives of Tara Bell and Madison Cole, a darker narrative began to take shape, one that revealed a twisted history of manipulation, obsession, and deeply buried resentment. What initially looked like a crime of impulse quickly unraveled into a meticulously planned act of cruelty rooted in years of psychological decay. Tara Bell had always been perceived as charismatic but unpredictable. In high school, she was the type who floated between social groups, never quite belonging to any, but always leaving an impression. After graduation, her life stalled. She enrolled in a local community college but dropped out after a year. She worked a series of low-paying jobs and lived in her deceased grandmother's house on the outskirts of town. Friends she once had drifted away, often describing her later behavior as erratic and unsettling. Some remembered her making odd comments about taking power back and getting even, though no one took her seriously at the time. Madison Cole, on the other hand, had moved to the city and pursued a career in online content creation. Her YouTube channel, which flew under the radar until investigators exposed it, was filled with strange, often disturbing content. She claimed to explore the boundaries of human behavior, a vague description that allowed her to blur the lines between satire, experiment, and cruelty. In one video, she followed strangers around grocery stores. In another, she filmed herself shouting unsettling phrases in public places just to capture reactions. While most viewers dismissed her as a provocateur, a closer look revealed a consistent theme: domination, control, and emotional manipulation. After returning to Cedar Ridge in 2020, Madison reconnected with Tara, reigniting their toxic friendship. The two became inseparable. According to online chats and journal entries found later, they believed they had been wronged by the world, cheated out of the lives they deserved. Elise Monroe became their symbol of that perceived injustice. She was everything they weren't: accomplished, respected, and admired. She had a future and they felt invisible, but it wasn't just jealousy, it was something deeper, an obsessive need to reverse the roles and assert power over someone they believed had taken theirs away. Their communications revealed that they spent months planning every detail of what they called the project. They referred to Elise only as the subject, dehumanizing her even in private messages. They mapped out ways to isolate her, subdue her and record the psychological effects of captivity. They purchased equipment over time, rope, restraints, a camcorder, soundproofing materials, and stored it in the basement of Tara's house. They even practiced rehearsals, acting out scenarios to make sure everything would go as planned. What disturbed investigators most was how detached the two women were in their writings. There was no sense of remorse, no hesitation. They saw Elise not as a person, but as a case study, a tool for validation. Madison wrote about wanting to document real transformation, while Tara spoke of breaking her piece by piece. They treated it like an artistic pursuit, something to be admired and studied. By the time Elise had vanished, the trap had already been set. What appeared to be a sudden disappearance was actually the final step in a process that had begun long before Elise ever stepped into that black SUV. And as police would soon discover, the cruelty was not only in what they did, but in how carefully and calmly they had planned to do it. After the arrest of Tara Bell and Madison Cole, authorities turned their full attention to gathering physical evidence that could corroborate the horrific contents of the memory card. The breakthrough came when investigators obtained a search warrant for Tara's house, the same home she had inherited from her grandmother, located at the edge of a wooded area just outside Cedar Ridge. From the outside, the house looked worn but ordinary, with peeling white paint and overgrown shrubs. But what they found inside revealed the true depth of the crime. In the basement, officers discovered a hidden room behind a false wall. The entrance was disguised as a storage cabinet, which swung open to reveal a narrow hallway lined with black soundproof foam. At the end of the hall was a single locked door. Inside was the room from the video, dimly lit, cold, and unmistakably the same space where Elise had been filmed tied to a chair. The air was stale, and the room smelled of mold and chemicals. There were scraps of duct tape, broken restraints, and a stained towel in the corner. On one wall, investigators found a crude outline drawn in red marker, possibly an early sketch of how the room was designed to be set up for filming. Forensics teams worked carefully, uncovering small but damning traces. Hair consistent with Elise's was found tangled in the restraints. A small splatter of blood tested positive for her DNA. A cracked camera tripod lay on the floor, and hidden beneath a loose panel was a USB drive containing additional footage that had not been shared or uploaded anywhere. The recovered footage, though incomplete, offered more chilling insight. In one clip, Elise appeared to be speaking, calmly at first, then increasingly panicked. In another, the camera focused only on her hands, bound tightly with zip ties, as she struggled to free herself. The most disturbing part came at the end of the drive. A short, silent clip showing Elise breaking free from the chair, stumbling toward what looked like the door, and then the camera abruptly dropping. The screen went black. That was the last recorded moment. Despite the overwhelming evidence of captivity and abuse, Elise still hadn't been found. Days passed as investigators searched the surrounding area, focusing on the dense woods behind Tara's property. Eventually, a cadaver dog led officers to a shallow grave roughly 600 feet from the house. The body was wrapped in a plastic tarp and buried beneath a layer of loose stones and dirt. An autopsy confirmed the remains were Elise Monroe. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, and investigators believed it occurred shortly after the last video was recorded. Beside the grave was a wooden object stuck into the soil, a small handmade totem, carved with strange symbols. Police suspected it was left by Madison, whose journal writings often mentioned marking completion of her experiments. The detail added an even more disturbing layer, suggesting that Elise's death was not only planned, but ritualized in their minds. With Elise's body recovered and physical evidence now linking both women to the crime scene, the prosecution's case solidified. But beyond the facts, what haunted everyone involved in the case was the cruelty of it all. Elise wasn't killed in a moment of rage or confusion. She was methodically isolated, held captive, and ultimately murdered by two people who treated her suffering as a form of entertainment. What wasn't captured on tape was just as horrifying as what was. The trial of Tara Bell and Madison Cole drew national attention, not just because of the horrific nature of the crime, but because of how meticulously it had been planned and documented. The courtroom was packed with reporters, law students, and concerned citizens, all trying to make sense of how two seemingly ordinary women could commit such an unthinkable act. Elise Monroe's family sat quietly throughout the proceedings, enduring each new detail with quiet strength. They had waited for justice, and now it was finally unfolding in front of them. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence. Forensic specialists testified about the blood and DNA found in Tara's basement. Digital experts showed how files on the USB drive and memory card linked directly to devices owned by the defendants. The footage itself was shown to the jury in carefully selected segments, enough to prove intent and premeditation without further traumatizing those in the room. Elise's movements, her visible distress, and the haunting laughter behind the camera left a lasting impact. The jurors were visibly shaken. The most chilling part of the trial came when the prosecution read aloud portions of the journal entries recovered from Madison and Tara. In them, they described Elise not as a person, but as an object, a subject of an experiment they felt proud of. Madison had written about how documenting real collapse is the truest form of art, while Tara described Elise's cries as proof of a breaking point. There was no remorse in their words, only obsession and satisfaction. Tara refused to testify. She sat silently during the entire trial, often staring blankly ahead, showing no emotion. Madison, however, chose to speak. Her testimony stunned the court. She claimed the entire project had been an extreme performance intended to blur the line between reality and storytelling. She insisted they never meant to kill Elise, arguing that her death had been accidental, but her words rang hollow. The evidence told a different story, one of planning, preparation, and a total disregard for human life. After 3 weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury reached a unanimous verdict: guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder, kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and conspiracy. The judge sentenced both women to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There were no outbursts, no final words, just silence. Though justice had been served, the pain lingered. Elise's family declined all interview requests. They didn't want their daughter remembered for what was done to her, but for the life she lived before it. Her friends established a scholarship, fund in her name at Cedar Ridge Medical College, ensuring that her legacy would continue to help others. The town of Cedar Ridge struggled to move on. The case had shattered the illusion of safety that so many had taken for granted. It forced people to rethink what danger looks like, not a stranger in the shadows, but a familiar face smiling from across a room. Tara and Madison had been part of the community, hiding their cruelty behind normal routines. Elise's story became a warning. Not all evil is loud. Sometimes it plans in silence, waits in plain sight, and documents every step with a smile.